All right, so picture this. You're a World War II soldier, but instead of a typical battlefield, you're getting dropped behind enemy lines in a silent aircraft that's made mostly of plywood and fabric.
Really makes you wonder what they were thinking back then.
Right. That was actually the reality for thousands of American glider troops.
Wow.
Yeah. And their story, it's just one of the wild things we're going to cover today. As we kind of dive into this world of American airborne operations in World War II, you've probably heard about the paratroopers, the daring jumps out of planes.
Yeah.
But the glider troops.
Yeah.
Their story is just as incredible. And our source material on American World War II paratroopers really gets into their vital role.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the development of these airborne forces, these daring jumps, landings. It all came about because the Allies needed a way to break through, all those heavily fortified enemy lines.
It's like a giant chess game, right?
Yeah, think of it like that, yeah. A high-stakes game of chess.
Yeah.
And these paratroopers, these glider troops, they're the surprise opening move,
Yeah.
to outmaneuver the enemy.
So let's back up for a second, just in case anybody needs a little refresher on World War II. We're talking about global conflict here. And while we're focusing on American forces today, other nations were also developing these airborne units, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, this is a completely revolutionary shift in warfare at the time.
Yeah. Before airborne units, armies were mostly stuck, bound to land or sea. But with the development of the paratroopers, the glider troops, all of a sudden you could be attacked from anywhere.
Right. Anywhere.
The element of surprise, yeah, it really added a whole new dimension to warfare.
For sure. Now, when most people picture airborne operations, they think paratroopers.
Of course.
It's iconic, right?
Yeah.
The images of the soldiers jumping out of the planes all geared up.
Yeah, Hollywood loves a good paratrooper scene.
Oh, for sure.
And it's for good reason. They played such a critical role in some of the biggest battles of the war. Imagine, securing these key positions before the main force arrives, disrupting those enemy communications, just creating chaos. That was the paratroopers' task.
And speaking of chaos, we have to talk about D-Day. The biggest amphibious invasion ever, right?
Yeah.
Attacking from both sea and air.
It's huge.
It was huge. And our source talks about how American paratroopers, they were tasked with securing those vital bridges and causeways in Normandy to help those troops land on the beaches.
Oh, it was massive.
Yeah, a massive undertaking.
D-Day wasn't the only time they played a big role either. Operation Market Garden, less successful, sure, but still ambitious.
Right.
It was another attempt to push into Germany using airborne troops.
Interesting.
It really shows both the potential and the risk of this new kind of warfare.
Okay, so we've got the paratroopers, that first strike, but here's where it gets really interesting. The glider troops. Soldiers landing silently in gliders made of wood and fabric.
It sounds crazy.
The first time I read that, I was like, what?
I know.
This is nuts.
That's exactly what made them so valuable. You can't just airdrop a tank or a jeep.
Well, no.
You need a way to get heavy equipment behind enemy lines, and that's where these gliders, as wild as they came in.
That makes sense.
They were the workhorses. Larger troop numbers, heavy weapons. The paratroopers couldn't carry all that.
Okay, hold on. So these gliders were essentially plywood, canvas, held together with hope and a prayer. And they were towed by planes, then cut loose to just glide silently into enemy territory.
Silently and very awkwardly.
I bet. Our source talks about those landings. It doesn't sound fun.
Oh, not fun at all.
Yeah.
Imagine being packed into this glider, and it's not a smooth ride.
Oh, no.
One glider troop described the experience as being, tossed around like a pea in a whistle.
Oh, my gosh.
And that's before you even factor in, the enemy fire.
I was going to say, that's before any of that starts.
Exactly.
Okay, that is terrifying.
Well,
We're talking about landing a flying box made of wood and fabric under enemy fire.
Oh, no.
Talk about needing nerves of steel.
Talk about it, yeah. And those rough landings. That was just the beginning.
Oh, no.
Once those gliders were down, the troops had their work cut out for them.
So they weren't just there to, drop off equipment. They actually went into battle.
Oh, yeah, totally. They had to secure landing zones, set up defenses, even engage the enemy directly. They were a real multi-purpose force.
It's amazing. The more we talk about this, the more I realize we think of these big battles and strategies, but it all comes down to those soldiers, right? Those glider troops wrestling these things to the ground under fire. That's what makes history real.
It's that human element that makes studying this stuff so fascinating, It's this fusion of daring strategy and just raw courage, never seen before on this scale.
Totally. So we've got the paratroopers landing behind enemy lines. You've got these glider troops swooping in with reinforcements. But D-Day, with just the sheer size of it, it's hard to grasp what that must have been like for those guys.
Imagine it's D-Day, the biggest amphibious invasion in history, and you're part of this airborne unit. Your job drops behind enemy lines in the dead of night. The sky is just filled with aircraft. The air is thick with tension. Paratroopers' objectives scatter across Normandy, cause disruption. So chaos, they had to stop those German reinforcements.
Wow. And while all this is going on, what are the glider troops dealing with?
Oh, they had their own set of challenges. Imagine trying to land these gliders in the dark, in a war zone. Talk about a recipe for disaster. They had to deliver the heavy stuff, the anti-tank guns, jeeps, all the things you can't just parachute in, all to support those paratroopers we were just talking about, and the main landing force.
That's happening all at the same time. It must have been absolute chaos.
Organized chaos, though. That's the thing. Both the paratroopers and the glider troops, they had a lot thrown at them on D-Day. Bad weather, messed up navigation, fierce German resistance. It's a testament to how well they were trained, how resilient they were, that they pulled it off at all.
Hold on, back up a sec. Messed up navigation.
Yeah.
Just how lost are we talking here?
Picture this. You're a paratrooper. You jump out of a plane in the middle of the night. Visibility's terrible. Navigation tools are limited. You end up miles off course. Some guys landed in fields, forests, even on top of buildings.
Talk about having to think on your feet. But seriously, to be part of this massive operation and you end up in the wrong place, surrounded by the enemy, that's got to be terrifying.
Not a job for the faint of heart. And then there's those glider landings. We talked about how rough they could be, but add enemy fire to the mix, that's a whole other level of danger.
I'm just trying to imagine piloting one of these gliders, knowing that landing could be just as dangerous as the fight afterwards. That takes guts.
For sure. They knew the risks, but they also knew they were vital. Without them, the paratroopers wouldn't have the heavy firepower they needed. They delivered, often on a moment's notice.
You know, it's so easy to get lost in the big picture of D-Day, the strategy, the battles. But every single one of those paratroopers landing in a field, every glider touching down under fire, those are individual stories of courage. We can't forget that.
Absolutely. And while our source focuses on the American side of things, the British and Germans, they used glider troops a lot too. It shows just how big of a deal these airborne operations were. They changed how wars were fought forever.
It really makes you wonder about the impact it had long term. These were risky missions, and as we've said, they didn't always go to plan. So what was their legacy?
Well, they definitely weren't foolproof. Operation Market Garden is proof enough of that. But they proved, without a doubt, that airborne operations were a force to be reckoned with.
So not just some experiment, they really changed things.
Oh, absolutely. Even today, airborne operations are a core part of military strategy. Obviously, the technology is way more advanced now. But those WWII jumps, those glider landings, those were the pioneers. They paved the way for the special forces we have today.
Right. But what about the cost? We're talking about some seriously dangerous missions here, a lot of uncertainty. What did this do to the soldiers?
You're right. It wasn't all about strategy and tech. It was about the people. Our source mentions how intense their training was. Marches, obstacle courses, and obviously jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
And the glider pilots, what was their training like?
Let's just say it wasn't easy. They had to master landing these, let's face it, pretty clunky aircraft, often in really tough conditions under pressure. It took skill, instinct, and probably a little bit of luck.
Luck. I don't know if I like the sound of that when we're talking about landing behind enemy lines in something made of plywood.
Good point. But really, both the paratroopers and the glider troops, their training was incredibly demanding. They had to be in top physical condition, know how to use their weapons and equipment, and have the mental toughness to face danger head on. No problem.
And the mental aspect, knowing you're about to jump out of a plane or land a glider in a war zone, that takes a different kind of bravery.
100%. The mental pressure was huge. Our source talks about how important camaraderie was within these units. They relied on each other, trusted each other with their lives. That brotherhood, that shared experience, it helped them cope with the stress and danger. It makes you think about the human cost of it all, right? It's easy to focus on the big picture, the strategies, but in the end, it was these individual soldiers, their bravery, that made the difference.
And speaking of individual stories, our source has some wild ones about what these paratroopers and glider troops went through.
Yeah.
It's different, hearing those firsthand accounts. It really hits home.
Totally. There's this one story about a paratrooper who landed on top of a church steeple during the invasion of Normandy. Talk about a bad landing spot.
He landed where? on top of a steeple.
Yeah, he was just hanging on, pretending to be dead for hours while the German soldiers were patrolling below him.
Oh my gosh.
Just crazy. It shows the risks these guys took. Every jump, every glider landing, it was a gamble.
Wow. Every single mission. A story in itself. But it couldn't have all been close calls and near-death experiences, right?
Mm.
Did they ever talk about the camaraderie, the sense of purpose, that kind of thing that got them through?
You're right, it wasn't all bad. The source talks about the pride these guys had. Being part of this elite unit, they knew they were part of something huge, something that would change history.
Yeah, that esprit de corps, that shared experience.
Yeah,
You really feel that in their stories.
for sure. And for a lot of these guys, it was an adventure, a way to prove themselves. Yeah, there was fear and loss, but there was also that sense of purpose, of brotherhood that you don't find anywhere else.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into American paratroopers and glider troops in World War II, what's the one thing you want our listeners to really think about?
I think it's that incredible courage these soldiers had and their ingenuity. Jumping out of planes, landing gliders made of wood and fabric under enemy fire. It shows you what people are capable of when the stakes are high.
Well said. And for everyone listening, I really encourage you to learn more about these stories, the personal accounts of these men. That's where you truly get the impact of what they did and what their sacrifice meant.